Hi there, this is Erica Merrill, and I am the founder of Perfect Legal Video. And today I have with us Attorney Brian Jones, criminal defense attorney out of Ohio, and we are going to be talking about what does a DUI defense lawyer advise if you find yourself drunk at a bar. Welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Erica. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. So I love today's topic because I really feel like it's the question most people have a little too late.
It is. And, we've always stated that the mission of these discussions is to educate people and make sure that everybody stays safe. And this is one of those topics where you're never going to hire a lawyer to answer this question before you find yourself in the position. So this is more of a public service announcement than anything else.
Yes, learn from other people's mistakes. And I mean, number one, just, plan ahead. That's always going to be the thing, have a ride if you're going to drink, that sort of thing. But people get pulled over for a reason. It's because they're a little caught by surprise by maybe they didn't eat enough and they drank a little bit too much, or they're tired as well. They took some medication and they didn't realize how it was going to affect them. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that someone would find themselves feeling, I guess, not in good enough condition to drive.
Absolutely. Or, what's supposed to be a quick cocktail turns into a more elaborate, social event, a business meeting becomes very successful, and you start hammering out details, and before you know it, you've been working on a contract or a business deal for 3, 4, 5 hours, and and of course the waiter keeps coming around and saying, hey, can I fill up your beer, can I get you another drink? And those social pressures can be very great, and people cave to them. And then the question becomes, what's your decision when you find yourself in that position?
Yeah. So, I mean, what would the first choice be? I mean, to avoid any complications before we get into the more complicated issues.
Well, the first thing I would say for somebody that finds themselves in that position is pay your tab. Because the last thing you want to do is make the establishment upset at you because you left without paying that. So step one is pay your tab. Now, you're able to leave the bar, and what do you do next? Well, in my opinion, your best choice is the Uber ride home and the Uber ride back to your car very early the next morning. Now, that's not available for everybody. A lot of locations don't have rideshare programs, but I would say that most areas do have a taxi service. And the vast majority of establishments that serve alcohol will call a taxi for you. So you can always go back into the establishment and say, I just don't feel comfortable with driving right now. Would you call me a cab?
I think that's great advice, and certainly advice that everyone should take. But, people find themselves making decisions when they're, maybe not at their most alert. And that brings me to the next question. I mean, I know for me, if I have a drink and I'm well rested and it's not too late and I've had something to eat and all the different things, the stars are aligning here, I feel okay. And it's not until some other factors come in, like maybe I just really haven't had a lot of sleep this week. Maybe I was in a big meeting that I had been preparing for, and maybe I hadn't eaten that much and I'm just feeling kind of exhausted. So maybe one drink or 2 drinks over a period of time are going to hit me a lot harder. I mean, have you seen a lot of situations like that where the person was just a little more tired than normal?
I have, Erica. We've actually had a case very recently that resolved quite favorably for our client. And without going into too many specific details, the general idea was that we had verification from a bar tab that he had had 2 drinks. But the reality was that this was in fact a business meeting, just like you proposed, Erica, and the business deal went well. He made his proposal. They shook hands and closed the deal. But he had been spending a lot of hours that week getting prepared for the meeting, and the exhaustion finally hit him after the adrenaline rush of the deal finally wore off. So as he's driving home, he realizes that he's not safe to drive. So he pulls into a gas station, and he pulls into a parking spot, has no issues driving, no issues pulling over. He lays his chair back and he decides, I'm going to catch a few Z's before I finish the last 40 minutes to get home. And what happens, but before he knows it, an officer's knocking on his window, asking him to get out of the car, perform field sobriety tests. And then the next thing he knows is he's charged with driving while intoxicated.
Yeah, and I mean, what do you do in that situation? Because I've heard of that before, and let's face it, we're kind of near the end of our winter months here, but up here in the Northeast, it gets very cold, and I know where you are, it also gets very cold. So if you want to take a nap, you're more likely to keep that engine running. And what is your advice?
I would say a few things. First is, if you can have the engine not running, then you definitely should. The officer in my client's case, I think his first mistake was charging the DUI rather than physical control of a motor vehicle. Now, the difference between physical control of a motor vehicle and a DUI is that element of operation. So to be in physical control of a motor vehicle, the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that an individual had the ability to operate and control the vehicle and was impaired. The difference being in the DUI situation that the individual was in fact operating the motor vehicle while being impaired. So how do you avoid that? How do you put yourself in a position where you're not able to operate and control the motor vehicle? Well, I would say step one would be put the keys in the glove box so they're not accessible from wherever you are in the car. Second, put yourself in a position that you're not behind the wheel. Put yourself in the passenger seat if you've got a coupe, or if you've got a sedan, an SUV, or a van of some sort, get in the back seat. That way, there's no doubt that you don't have any ability to operate and control this motor vehicle. Now, that being said, Erica, there's no guarantee that an officer and a prosecutor might not try and push that issue. But I'll tell you what, I would love the opportunity to try that case to a jury, because I don't think there are 8 citizens anywhere in America who would convict you of making that good decision under those circumstances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in that case, you are trying to do the right thing. And I know, even if I haven't been drinking, tired driving is just as dangerous a lot of times. So, you do need to pull over and take a nap sometimes to finish the drive. And, I think that is great advice. Get in the back seat, put your keys somewhere else. Don't leave them in the ignition, and get the rest you need, and then drive when you feel like you are able and alert.
Absolutely. And Erica, to kind of touch on your point of tired driving being also dangerous or also exhibiting the signs of impaired driving, we had a case about 2 years ago where our client had to work a triple shift. She was a home health aide. She had her shift, and the person who was supposed to relieve her had come down with the flu or some illness, so she had to work their shift, and then she had another shift after that. Now, notwithstanding the impropriety of the agency making her work 3 shifts back to back to back, she was heading home from that, and she was tired. She gets pulled over, and she gets interrogated by an officer. Now, get this. She's on antidepressants, which have no ability to impair your operation of a motor vehicle, But the officer asks her, what drugs are you on? And she honestly tells him, I'm on antidepressants. Would you believe me if I told you that the officer cited her for DUI and our local prosecutor was going to take that case to trial and try to convict her of DUI because she was tired and had taken antidepressants? And we know that that's the only thing she took because she submitted to a urine screen, and that's the only thing that showed up in the screen.
Wow. I mean, that is unbelievable. I mean, obviously you don't want somebody driving while they're under the influence of something that actually has that effect, but really it sounds like exhaustion was the thing. And what do you get charged? Do you get charged with something if you are driving tired?
You could presumably be charged with reckless operation of a motor vehicle, but that would also have to include some dangerous operation, something to qualify as, in fact, operating a motor vehicle in the parlance of the statute in wanton disregard of others' safety.
So that's really good information to have. And I don't know what your advice would be on talking about medications that you're on. I mean, typically you don't have to talk to the officer. You can call your attorney first. That is something we've talked about a few times that I think a lot of people would find surprising. If an officer is knocking on your window and you're giving him your license and registration, but then he asks you to step out of the car and you say, 1 minute, I need to make a phone call. That most people would not know about that.
It certainly takes a lot of nerve to assert your constitutional rights. And in that situation, you certainly want to attempt to talk to a lawyer. Our law firm has the ability to contact myself or one of our other junior associates 24 hours, 365 days a year. You can reach out and speak with somebody and get advice on your situation. If for whatever reason you're not able to connect with a lawyer, the more important information to know is that you never have to answer an officer's questions and you never have to do field sobriety tests. You shouldn't engage in that rigged game. Don't do them.
So what if you're driving and you hit something? I mean, let me just preface this with, I'm not good at driving trucks. Like, I have had plenty, like there was a situation when I was in my early 20s where I had to drive this moving truck to sell equipment, and because I was in sales, and I had to stop doing the job because I got in a car accident every week. And I was not drunk. It was just really hard. I mean, there are situations where you hit things when you're sober. Maybe you're impairing yourself a bit if you've had one drink, or maybe not. But what if you hit something after you've had, maybe you're not even drunk, but after you've had a drink?
So the circumstances of your obligations after an accident depend on what you hit and what sort of damage was caused. If you hit an inanimate object, anything other than another human being, you've got 24 hours to identify the owner of that object and notify them of the accident. You are not obligated to stay on scene. You've got 24 hours. And that applies whether that's private property or government-owned property. So for instance, if you hit a stop sign, that's government-owned property, and you have an obligation to report that to likely the municipality or county that would manage that sign, possibly your local Department of Transportation office. But so long as you provide that notice to the government that you damaged their property, you've complied with your legal obligations. If there is a person injured, or if there's the possibility of a person being injured, you have to immediately stop, and you don't have to render medical assistance, but you have to exchange information and call for medical attention if that's necessary.
That's really good information to have. So, I mean, act responsibly. and make sure that the proper people are informed. So I guess another question I would have is, are there any obvious clues that would typically tip off a police officer to pull somebody over? There's a lot of obvious things. I mean, whether you're drunk or not, there are things that you shouldn't be doing. And there are things that people do because they're texting, or they, didn't keep their car up to snuff, that sort of thing. What are the most common that you see in your cases?
Well, Erica, we always talk about rolling probable cause. When I'm driving around with my wife, we see other cars and we're like, oh, that one's rolling probable cause. And what does that mean? Well, cars that have tail lights out. Although under Ohio law, you only have to have one working tail light, it's still an indicator for the officer. A lack of a license plate light, turn signals that don't work or aren't used. Obviously, you don't want to be speeding. You don't want to commit other traffic violations. It's not illegal to drink and drive. That's not a crime. It never has been a crime, I guess, since the 1920s, when alcohol possession and consumption was illegal, absent a medical prescription. But don't draw attention to yourself if you have been drinking. So in those situations, Erica, where you've gone out to dinner, you've had a couple glasses of wine with your dinner, you're responsibly consuming alcohol, on your way home, the best way to avoid police is, first and foremost, make sure that your car's in proper working order. Make sure that all of your lights are functioning. Then make sure that you obey all of the traffic laws. Go the speed limit. Use your turn signal. Stop behind the stop bar, stop signs, and at traffic lights. Be an especially careful driver so that the officer doesn't have a legitimate reason to pull you over in the first place. And that sort of level of care and attention, if you do ultimately get pulled over anyways, are the sorts of bits and pieces of evidence that I'm going to use in first negotiating with the prosecutor to convince them that this was a bogus charge in the first place, or we all know how recalcitrant they can be, telling the jury the driving was sober. Therefore, the person was sober. Mm-hmm. Setting us up, setting your defense team up early to show that you drove like a sober person, walked like a sober person, talked like a sober person throughout the whole process is the best way to avoid, first, coming to the attention of law enforcement, and second, being convicted of DUI if you are drawn to their attention and cited.
It's really great advice. I mean, just, drive responsibly, keep your car, all the headlights intact, and just keeping an eye on making sure that everything looks good to the common person that's driving beside you or behind you. Don't give them a reason to call 911 too. I mean, I know that a lot of times that's what happens. There's not even a police officer around. Your fellow drivers might think that something's up and they'll call 911 if they think that you're not driving properly.
Exactly. And we get those cases 4 or 5 times a year. And oftentimes they don't occur in the normal, time frame that we expect DUIs to come out of. That 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. time frame when people generally think of DUIs, but they occur at 2 in the afternoon or during rush hour when you cut somebody off and they get mad, and rather than tailgate you and honk their horn at you and maybe pull up beside you and give you the international symbol for, hey buddy, how you doing? They reach out and they call the police, and they make a false allegation that they saw you consuming a can of beer while you were driving, or they claim that you hit a barrier. All of these things, Erica, are facts out of my case files. These allegations and statements have come from other drivers, primarily during rush hour.
Wow, you know what? There's a lot of revenge that we talk about on these interviews, and you know, it can really wreak havoc on someone if somebody does that. If someone makes a false allegation because they don't like you or they don't like something that you did.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what we do here. Is our clients have done something that's not illegal, but may not have been the nicest thing to do. And then somebody uses the criminal justice system to exact revenge for that behavior.
That's true. Now, there's one last one that I wanted to talk about, and that is the excuse of the GPS sending you the wrong way. I know that they don't really accept that. You know, you didn't see something because you were looking at your GPS. I was once pulled over by an officer who said, well, maybe you shouldn't have your GPS right there. And I'm like, well, where do you want me to put it? If I put it here, it's still kind of in the way. If I put it on the floor, you know, then I'm looking down, you know, it's hard. Do you get any cases that have to do with the GPS?
Well, we've had cases where GPS sent clients in maybe not the most direct path from A to B. And we've had cases where clients missed, well, one case in particular that I'm thinking of right now, Erica, is a client missed a stop sign. And fortunately, there was no cross traffic at the time, but an officer witnessed him miss the stop sign, didn't stop at the stop sign, and he got stopped for that. That was a simple traffic violation. And you obviously know what the outcome of that case was. The not seeing the stop sign because of the GPS unit was not a valid defense. We were able to convince the prosecutor to let that person into traffic diversion, which is not typically allowed, but we were able to convince them that this was an appropriate circumstance for it. However, using the GPS is definitely a good idea if you don't know where you're going. And it's always a good idea to see traffic patterns and make sure that you're taking the most efficient way home. However, you should check the overall map and make sure that it makes sense. You know, if your GPS is sending you somewhere that's clearly not in the correct neighborhood, you may have done some data input wrongly there. I can tell you an example from my own personal life, Erica. I was going to visit a friend who had recently moved to a new apartment. And he gave me his address and I plugged it into my GPS. And I knew he lived in Clintonville. And Clintonville is a suburb of Columbus here. And it's kind of in the central, slightly to the western part of Columbus. And so I put his address in, and the GPS just happened to look at the map view. And since then, I've made it a habit to always look at the map view because they often offer multiple routes. Mm-hmm. It was taking me to the far east side of Columbus. And I said, that's not right. So then I went back and I realized that I hadn't put west, insert road name here, rather than east, or what I had put is just nothing. I just put the road name.
Common mistake.
Yeah. And so it was sending me to the entirely wrong part of the city. Now, had this not been, you know, on my way out for the evening, but rather on my way in for the evening, getting turned around and lost in an unfamiliar neighborhood is a recipe to get pulled over, whether you're sober or whether you've had a few drinks. So make sure that you check your GPS. And, you know, I always advise individuals, keep the GPS unit out of your windshield, you know, maybe just below the dash level. In my car, I've got a vent holder that holds my phone there so that it's just below the level of the window, but still just to the right of my instrument cluster.
Mm. Well, that's great. I think that those are all really good examples of things to avoid, and you know, reminding us of you know, how to drive properly and to look for the right things while we're in control of how much do cars weigh now? 1 or 2 tons, depending on what you're driving, I guess. So it's a lot. Is there anything that we've missed, do you think? Those are the questions that I had for today.
I don't think so, Erica. Just to recap, if you find yourself in a position where you don't feel comfortable driving, where you feel like you might be impaired, remember that fact. This is a multi-time missile that can kill you or kill the others on the road. And the safer option is always to find another way home. Now, it may appear more expensive in the short term, but I guarantee you, there's no Uber ride in the world that's going to be more expensive than a DUI. So first and foremost, try to find another way home. If that's not an option, sleep it off in the car, and do so in a safe manner. If you have been responsibly drinking and you're on your way home, make sure that you obey the traffic laws. And I would say, Erica, make sure you obey the traffic laws in general. There are a variety of charts and resources on the internet that show even exceeding the speed limit by 10, 15, or 20 miles per hour still only gets you to your destination 4, 10, maybe 12 minutes earlier.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Yeah, it's not worth it. Well, thank you so much, Brian. It's always nice to spend these Friday afternoons talking about criminal defense cases, and it's very interesting. So appreciate that, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
I'll look forward to seeing you next week, Erica. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.